Okay, so with those kind of concrete applications of the liberal outlook to the criminal law out of the way, let's turn now to the principles that animate these concrete examples. Okay, so two of the most important liberal, freedom-loving limits on the criminal law are the harm principle and the desert constraint. So I'll introduce each before diving into some questions you might have about them. So first, we're going to look in this video at the harm principle. In a nutshell, the idea of the harm principle is that conduct may be criminalized only if it's harmful to others. This principle is probably the most famous and central liberal principle of the criminal law. Here's the gist of the argument for the criminal law, for the harm principle, I mean. The whole point is to protect citizens from governments using the criminal law to overly restrict individual freedom and seek to control conduct that properly belongs in your individual sphere of control. Your sphere of autonomy, meaning your ability to freely choose how to live your life, and your sphere of discretion, meaning your ability to choose what to do, and also your sphere of privacy. So the harm principle recognizes that you have the right to keep yourself to yourself and freely decide how to live, except in very limited circumstances, namely when you start behaving in ways that harm or threaten serious harm to others. Then it becomes a matter of proper public concern, and the state can start to use the criminal law to regulate your conduct to protect others. But unless and until your conduct starts adversely affecting others, the criminal law should stay away. We talked about this before. As long as you don't harm or threaten harm to others, right, in a free society, you get to live your life as you choose, and it's no business of the state to tell you what to do when you're not harming or endangering anyone else. That's the harm principle. Okay, the harm principle, here's an important distinction. The harm principle is usually invoked as a limit on the criminal law, as a constraint that has to be met before criminalizing some conduct is actually permitted for the legislature to do. But it's worth noting that the harmfulness of your conduct can also, at least as a general rule of thumb, function as a positive basis for criminalization, a reason for the criminal law to get involved. So if some type of conduct is seriously harmful, then it's often taken as a call for the criminal law to get involved. After all, preventing harm or reducing it is one of the core functions of the criminal law. Harm reduction is one of the main kinds of consideration that justifies criminalizing this or that bit of behavior. So it's important to remember and distinguish two things: the harm principle as a limit on criminalization, and harm reduction as a positive basis for criminalization. I'll mainly focus on the harm principle as a limit, but we'll come back to harm reduction as a positive basis for criminalization in a couple places in the videos below. So just keep that distinction in mind: harm principle as a limit versus harm reduction as a basis that supports criminalization. Okay, so you probably have some burning questions about how the harm principle works. Most importantly, what is harm anyway? And how directly or closely does conduct have to be related to causing harm to satisfy the harm principle? We're going to come back to those questions in a minute. But first, I want to introduce the other main liberal criminal law limit, which is the desert constraint.